Good morning, and thank you for joining us for Navigating Section 504, Essential Knowledge for Families. We are so pleased today to have Tina Wroblewski as our presenter. Tina currently serves as a Senior Educational Services Specialist in the Office of Special Education Procedural Support within the Department of Special Services. Tina has a wide range of duties within the department to include all things Section 504, training, and working to resolve formal complaints filed with the Office for Civil Rights or through the state's complaint process. Tina brings a wealth of knowledge from her 27 years of dedicated service to Fairfax County Public Schools. Throughout her career, she has held a variety of positions, including special education teacher, high school special education department chair, and assistant principal. She has also served in specialized roles such as Systems of Support Advisor, Local Screening Chair, and Section 504 School-Based Coordinator, gaining deep expertise in both special education and 504. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Special Education from the State University of New York at Plattsburgh and a master's degree in Educational Leadership from George Mason University. Tina is also professionally licensed in multiple areas, including administration and supervision, specific learning disabilities, emotional disturbance, and intellectual disabilities. Thank you so much for being here today, Tina. I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. During our time together this morning, we're going to dive into the specifics of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. We're going to start off with a foundational understanding of what Section 504 is. We're going to walk through the qualification process, discuss Section 504 plans. We will also cover the reevaluation process, differentiate between Section 504 and the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, and conclude with a list of helpful resources. My goal this morning is to provide a clear and comprehensive overview of this very important topic. So what is Section 504? Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. The core principle of Section 504 is to ensure that no qualified person with a disability is excluded from, denied the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity that receives federal financial assistance. For our purposes this morning, we'll be speaking in the context of education, meaning that any educational institution that receives federal funding must provide students with disabilities a free, appropriate public education, commonly known as FAPE. Section 504 ensures that the needs of students with disabilities are met as adequately as the needs of their non-disabled peers by primarily focusing on the provision of accommodations within the general education curriculum. So how does one qualify under Section 504? This is a collaborative process which begins when there is a reason to suspect that a general education student has a disability and needs accommodations, modifications, and/or services in order to access the programs and activities offered by Fairfax County Public Schools. Given this suspicion, a referral should be made to the local screening committee, or LSC, at your child's base school for review. Referrals can be made either orally or in writing. It can be done by a parent, a private practitioner, a counselor, a teacher, or any other individual. Following a referral, the local screening committee, or LSC, must convene within 10 business days to review the referral information. This meeting is a critical step in determining the appropriate next course of action for the student. The purpose of the LSC is to review records and other performance evidence of students being referred to make recommendations to meet the student's educational and behavioral needs and/or determine whether an evaluation for special education and/or a qualification under Section 504 is warranted. So let's review who actually attends a local screening meeting. Participants will include a principal's designee, a general education teacher of the student, a special education teacher, the school psychologist, a school social worker, and the person initiating the referral as appropriate, and other staff members also as appropriate. Additional staff members is dependent on the concerns regarding the student. For example, if there are communication concerns, a speech and language pathologist would be invited to the meeting. Parents are notified of this meeting and are encouraged to attend and participate. Parents are encouraged to complete the parent-guardian input form as a means to help document your concerns. Completion of this form is also helpful in the event that a parent cannot attend the meeting. It is important to note that given the legal nature of the 10 business day timeline from referral, the meeting cannot be postponed if a parent cannot attend. The local screening committee will determine one of the following outcomes. The local screening committee team may conclude that an evaluation for special education services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, is not necessary at the time of the meeting. Or the local screening committee may conclude that there is a need for a formal evaluation to determine eligibility for special education services under IDEA. In addition, the LSC may conclude that the student should be referred to other school-based support resources designed to help students within the general education environment. Examples include maybe a child study team or a multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS team. The local screening team may also conclude after their data review and evaluation to move forward to consider Section 504 qualification. If the local screening committee determines that they'd like to move forward to consider Section 504 qualification, it will be important to understand the definition of a student with a disability under Section 504. When the local screening committee determines to move forward with that consideration of initial qualification under Section 504, the committee must determine if the student meets all of the Section 504 criteria. To qualify under Section 504, the committee must find that the student has a mental or physical impairment that impacts a major life activity. It's important to note that students with temporary impairments, such as a broken arm or a broken leg or a concussion, should not be evaluated under Section 504. Under Section 504, a person is considered to have a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or major life activities. This definition also extends to individuals with a record of such impairment or those who are regarded as having such an impairment. Let's explore key components of this definition. First, let's take a look at a physical impairment. A physical impairment refers to any physiological disorder, condition, cosmetic disfigurement, or anatomical loss affecting one or more of the following bodily systems: neurological, musculoskeletal, special sense organs, cardiovascular, reproductive, digestive, hemic or lymphatic, skin, and endocrine. Some examples of a physical impairment might be diabetes, chronic migraine headaches, multiple sclerosis, or a vision impairment. Now let's take a look at the mental impairment component of this definition. A mental impairment refers to any mental or psychological disorder, such as intellectual disabilities, organic brain syndrome, emotional or mental illness, or specific learning disability. Some examples of a mental impairment may be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, commonly known as ADHD, a neurological disorder, anxiety, depression, dyslexia, or learning disability. Now let's dive into the substantially limits component part of this definition. Section 504 does not define substantially limits. However, when considering substantial limitations, students must be measured against their same age, non-disabled peers in the general population and without benefit of medication or mitigating factors. Other key factors include an impairment that substantially limits one major life activity does not need to limit other major life activities, and an impairment that is an episodic or in remission is considered a disability if it would substantially limit a major life activity when it is active. The last component of this definition is the major life activities. While it's not an exhaustive list, major life activities include self-care, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, working, learning, eating, sleeping, standing, lifting, bending, reading, concentrating, thinking, operation of a bodily function, and communicating. Now that we have an understanding of the definition of a disability under Section 504, let's take a look at the qualification itself and the type of data that can be used by the local screening committee when determining if a student qualifies under Section 504. Under Section 504, no formal testing is required. However, the committee must consider a variety of information. A single source of information, such as a doctor's report, cannot be the only information that is reviewed and considered. Data sources may include, but again is not limited to, student performance, student attendance, discipline, teacher-provided input, parental input, and assessment data. Upon review of the data, the committee must determine if any additional data is needed to make an initial qualification determination. If additional information is needed, the committee will need to propose the required assessments and obtain parental consent to conduct the determined evaluations. If the committee determines that no additional data is required, the committee will need parental consent to move forward with the evaluation, whether or not formal assessments are required under Section 504. If parental consent is not obtained at this step, the process comes to a stop. If parental consent is provided, the committee may immediately move forward to the 504 consideration. Once all of the data is reviewed, the committee must identify the physical or mental impairment, determine the major life activity or activities that are limited, and most importantly, describe the limitation of the student's impairment on the identified major life activity or activities. If the committee determines that a student does qualify under Section 504, a separate group of individuals or knowledgeable committee will come together within 30 calendar days of the initial qualification to determine if the student requires a 504 plan with accommodations due to their documented disability. Upon the scheduling of this meeting, you'll be provided with procedural safeguards as well as an optional parent input form. The knowledgeable committee must include a principal's designee, a general education teacher, and while parents are invited and encouraged to participate, they are not a required member of this committee. Depending on the needs of the student, other staff such as psychologist, social worker, or service provider may be invited to attend. Students are also encouraged to attend as their input regarding their needs is key. During this 504 plan meeting, the knowledgeable committee has a responsibility to determine if the student requires the 504 plan that includes accommodations, modifications, and/or services in order to have equal access, the same as their non-disabled peers. Although uncommon, it is possible for a student to meet the eligibility requirements of Section 504, but not possess a formal accommodation plan. This situation occurs when the student doesn't currently need specific accommodations to ensure equal access to the educational environment alongside their non-disabled peers. So let me give you an example. For instance, we have a student whose name is Luke. Luke has type 1 diabetes. Luke's diabetes is a physical impairment that substantially limits a major life activity, specifically here, a major bodily function. This qualifies Luke under Section 504. However, while at the 504 plan meeting, the knowledgeable committee discusses and reviews data and determine if Luke requires any accommodations related to that documented disability. The knowledgeable committee discusses the fact that Luke is very independent. He manages condition extremely well. He uses a continuous glucose monitor, which he can manage on his own. He doesn't need to leave class for medication or for any other reason related to his diabetes. He eats lunch at the same time as all the other students and doesn't need special dietary arrangements from the school. Given that the determination is that Luke didn't require any accommodations to ensure that he had equal access to participate in school activities and receive an education, Luke's 504 plan would simply indicate that he did not require accommodations at that time. Conversely, if it was determined that Luke did require accommodations due to his diabetes to have equal access, the same as his non-disabled peers, the knowledgeable committee would write a 504 plan using data to determine appropriate accommodations for Luke. When writing a 504 plan with accommodations, modifications, and/or services that the student requires, the knowledgeable committee should include accommodations that are directly related to the impairment while considering the entire school experience. The committee may need to consider accommodations that a student may require in settings such as cafeteria, field trips, the elevator, elective classes, or even during evacuation procedures. It is also important to be specific when describing accommodations so that they can be implemented with fidelity. For example, if we know a student will need extended time for assignments, the plan will want to describe how much extra time that student requires and on what type of assignments and in what areas. It may be that the student requires extra time in the area of writing, more specifically essay writing. However, they don't require any extra time on assignments in mathematics. The knowledgeable committee may also need to determine if they need to consider that a student requires an electronic device, including a cell phone, during the day. The 504 plan will need to clearly document the reason for access to this personal electronic device and when it's needed and how it will be used to meet the student's needs during the school day. Let's take a look at a sample 504 plan together. There are 5 components to a 504 plan: the presenting problem, the major life activity or activities impacted, the list of required accommodations, a listing of the knowledgeable committee members, and assessment accommodations. As we walk through the components of a Section 504 plan, let's keep this student in mind. Maya is a 10th grade student who qualifies under Section 504 due to a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also ADHD, combined typed, which impacts their concentration and executive functioning. Maya is easily distracted by external and internal factors and has difficulty independently completing written work. The teachers report that Maya tends to misplace homework and important papers and has difficulty initiating and completing long-term assignments. During testing, Maya often loses track of time and has trouble staying seated for extended periods of time. Now that we have that student in mind, let's review each component of a Section 504 plan. The first 2 components of a 504 plan are the presenting problem and what major life activities are impacted by their impairment. This information comes directly from the most recent qualification document. In this case, the presenting problem is Maya has a medical diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Maya was diagnosed in 2022 by her pediatrician, Dr. Kaufman. Given this scenario, the major life activities impacted are concentrating and executive functioning. This next section is where the knowledgeable committee will discuss and determine what accommodations Maya requires in order to access their education the same as their non-disabled peers. Through this discussion, the knowledgeable committee must consider accommodations in the variety of areas, including curriculum and instruction, assignments, and testing. In addition, the committee may also need to consider accommodations that a student may require to access a variety of settings, again, to include classroom, field trips, cafeteria, extracurricular activities, or again, evacuation plans. This consideration of accommodations is based on the student's Section 504 qualification and current functioning. In Maya's case, the knowledgeable committee determined that Maya requires the following accommodations: access to teacher notes, strategic seating away from distractions, chunking of long-term assignments with interim due dates, teacher check-ins after verbal instructions, extended time up to 50% on written assignments, breaks during assessments. More specifically, Maya requires a 5-minute break after 30 minutes of testing. Next, the Section 504 plan will list everyone who took part in the 504 plan meeting. This sample plan here includes parents, 2 general education teacher, the school designee, and the counselor. Please note that the signature here only confirms that you were present at the meeting. I do want to highlight that as a civil rights statute, Section 504 governs a school's responsibility to prevent discrimination. The resulting 504 plan is a non-consensual accommodation plan, meaning the school is not required to obtain parental permission to implement these accommodations. Parental input is a vital component of the Section 504 process, as we value your insights into your child's needs and how they can best be supported at school. The last of the major components is to include any testing accommodations that Maya may require, both during classroom assessments and during her geometry, chemistry, and world history 2 SOL exams. As discussed earlier in the accommodations discussion, the knowledgeable committee determined that Maya required a 5-minute break after 30 minutes of testing due to her difficulties sitting for long periods of time. As you see on the second page of the Section 504 plan, the knowledgeable committee added this accommodation for all of Maya's testing environments. During this section of the 504 plan, it is possible that the knowledgeable committee determines that testing accommodations were considered but not selected, or that the knowledgeable committee also may need to determine if they require any additional accommodations on classroom tests, but not on SOL tests. It's important to note that any SOL accommodation must be based on the routine use of that same accommodation during classroom assessments. At the conclusion of the Section 504 plan meeting, parents will be provided with a final copy of the Section 504 plan along with a prior written notice, or PWN. There are times that related services may need to be added to a Section 504 plan due to the unique needs of the student in order to provide FAPE. These services are to be discussed at the Section 504 plan meeting with the specific provider in attendance and be based on evaluated data. Here's a few examples of related services that could be part of a 504. A speech and language pathologist may work with a student on a communication issue that is impacting their ability to learn or interact with others. An occupational therapist may help a student with fine motor skills, such as writing. A physical therapist may help a student with gross motor skills and mobility to navigate their school environment. One last example may be a school counselor who provides support to help a student manage a mental health condition, such as anxiety or depression. Additionally, specialized transportation may also need to be considered if a student's disability prevents them from using the standard school bus. If a student has a health condition, the best way to manage their health condition is through an individual health care plan, commonly known as IHCP. However, if the student requires health-related accommodations or services beyond that healthcare plan, a referral should be made to the local screening committee to determine if there's a need for an evaluation for qualification under Section 504. If found eligible, the Section 504 knowledgeable committee would then determine what accommodations and/or services that the student required based on their documented disability. The existence of a health condition and/or health plan in and of itself does not necessitate the development of a 504 plan. Section 504 plans are reviewed yearly to make sure that the accommodation plan is appropriate based on the current needs of the student. However, a 504 plan meeting may occur at any time to revise accommodations during the school year if needed. A Section 504 plan with accommodation should grow and change with the student. At the beginning of the school year, each school has a school-based coordinator, or SBC, that works with the school administration to establish a process in which staff are made aware of students in their building who have a 504 plan. As 504 plans are updated, the appropriate staff are also made aware of any changes that may have been made to the plan. This may happen through providing a printed copy of the new 504 plan to staff, or alerting staff that a new plan exists, which can then be accessed through the Student Information System, or SIS, or a program that staff have called Get IEP. A Section 504 reevaluation is the process by which the knowledgeable committee convenes with the purpose of reviewing evaluation information and data to determine if the student continues to qualify as a student with a disability under Section 504. This process occurs every 3 years, but again can be held earlier due to changes in student need. For example, a student may have a new diagnosis or have increased needs that would warrant a reevaluation to better document the impact of their impairment. During this meeting, the knowledgeable committee will use gathered data to determine if the existing data that they have collected is sufficient or if additional data is needed to make a qualification determination. If existing data is sufficient to use for the purposes of considering continued Section 504 eligibility, no parental consent is required for the reevaluation. However, if additional individual assessments are needed in order to determine if the student continues to qualify, written parental consent for formal assessments is required. Upon completion of those assessments, the knowledgeable committee would then come back no later than 65 days from that determination that additional assessments were needed to complete the eligibility process. During this meeting, the knowledgeable committee will use gathered data to determine if the existing data that they've collected is sufficient or if additional data is needed to make that determination. You may find that a student's disability has begun to significantly impede their academic performance, and their needs have escalated beyond the accommodations provided in that 504 plan. In this case, an evaluation for special education eligibility may be necessary. Some examples of some student behavior that may trigger going back through the screening process to consider evaluations for special education eligibility may be noticeably declining grades, routine poor performance on standardized assessments, very little progress is being made even with intervention support, an increase in disciplinary referrals, perhaps signs of significant anxiety, depression, withdrawal, inattention, mental health issues, etc. A student's need for special education should be considered when their disability requires specially designed instruction to make progress in the curriculum, meaning that the instruction involves adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address a student's specific disability. This differs from accommodations, which are changes to the learning environment. This chart on the next 2 slides summarizes the key differences between IDEA, again, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and you can see it's broken out by category. This slide highlights that IDEA is focused primarily on providing educational benefit and typically covers students with specific disabilities who require special education. The IEP under IDEA outlines the student's goals and objectives, whereas on the other hand, Section 504 has a broader definition of a disability focused on ensuring equal access for eligible students in the general education setting through accommodations. This slide highlights that while an IEP receives federal funding, the 504 plan does not. However, both laws grant parents procedural rights, including the right to due process or an impartial hearing, with the key difference being that IDEA includes the stay put provision, while Section 504 does not. One additional difference between IDEA and Section 504 that is not listed on this chart is the way in which student progress is measured. In short, monitoring student progress is a mandatory and highly specific component of the IEP process under IEA, whereas in Section 504 does not have a formal method for monitoring student progress. IDEA monitors progress quarterly on measurable goals to evaluate the effectiveness of that specialized instruction and services, whereas Section 504 focuses on ensuring that a student is receiving the necessary accommodations for equal access through regular reviews of the Section 504 plan. An IEP supersedes a 504 plan, and at no time should a student have an active IEP and an active 504 at the same time. If a student is not found eligible under IDEA or becomes ineligible for special education services, the school may need to consider Section 504 qualification. Conversely, if a student who is eligible under Section 504 is then found eligible under IDEA, their 504 plan will become inactive. It is common for parents to be unsure whether an IEP or a 504 plan is better for their child. The decision between an IEP and a 504 plan must always be an individualized decision based on a student's unique needs, along with the determination of the type and severity of support required for that student to access their education. The decision to move from an IEP to a 504 plan is also an individualized decision, which may be made if your student no longer requires specialized instruction and has made significant progress. In this case, a 504 plan may be more appropriate. One of the most prominent benefits of a 504 plan for many students is that it focuses on enabling success within the general education environment, which is the key to promoting student independence. There's a variety of resources available to you as you navigate to your child's educational needs. At the school level, you can reach out to your child's school, teacher or teachers, the school counselor, or school administration. Each school, as I said, also has a school-based coordinator, or SBC, who serves as a primary point of contact for Section 504. Should you need support outside of the building, each pyramid of schools has a procedural support liaison, or PSL. The PSL is a key staff member from the Office of Special Education Procedural Support that serves as a resource for school staff and parents regarding both special education and Section 504. Within the Office of Special Education Procedural Support, there are also due process and eligibility specialists, as well as a Section 504 specialist that can assist you with any procedural support. In addition to school-based resources, you can also find more information regarding Section 504 and special education through the FCPS website. You can find a variety of resources such as the Section 504 Procedures Manual that includes the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 procedural safeguards, as well as resources related to special education such as the Special Education Handbook for Parents. To find the resources mentioned, please visit the FCPS website, fcps.edu, and enter in resources to support special education and Section 504 plans into the search feature. This will allow you to see all of the items mentioned in one place. If you simply just want to type in Section 504 into the search bar, it will take you to certain items, but it won't take you to everything I mentioned here. Lastly, for more information regarding civil rights, you can connect with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, or OCR. While I know we had a full hour, Section 504 isn't as lengthy as special education, so this actually does bring us to the conclusion of the presentation portion of the webinar. I do want to thank you all for joining us today. We've covered a lot of ground. We've explored an understanding of what a disability is under Section 504. We've walked through the referral and evaluation process to the development of a 504 plan with reasonable accommodations. Finally, we discussed the importance of Section 504 eligibility and plan reviews to ensure that students are provided with the support they need to be successful. We did dip our toes a little bit into the world of special education, and while I know we didn't go too deep into that conversation, many of the resources I've shared can assist you if you have further questions about the special education process. I encourage you, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out for assistance. I encourage you to continue learning and advocating for the students in your lives. Again, thank you for your time and dedication. I hope this webinar has empowered you with knowledge and the confidence to navigate the world of Section 504 effectively.